What's good? You rocking with your boy TheCzarr, all rights reserved. Help the channel grow. All the information's in the description, but I always give that cash app to start it off. You know, $ capital THE capital CZARR. Now the next commenter, Isness, Anima, we're getting into. And one thing that Isness asked was the Florida rules for collecting DNA evidence. Now, I agree. This is a very important point, and I'm glad she brought it up because she's from Cali, and she says DNA must be collected right away, depending on the crime. And yes, Isness, the rules are the same as California. Whereas if a felony convicted or before conviction, if being accusations of an incredible felony, and that would be any felony or particular misdemeanor cases, DNA must be collected right away. So being what these men were convicted of, according to what I've read in Florida law, all of their DNA should have been extracted off the rip. Now, why haven't investigators done this? I don't know, especially being the level of crime they're being accused of. This is very peculiar. From what I read, and just so you know I'm telling the truth, what I read is 943, and details were in 3A. Under their laws, there were several statements that were synonymous with this situation that should have incurred to them giving DNA samples. Now, why haven't they given DNA samples? I'm curious as well now. That's something that literally I thought of, but never thought was a case until they're asking for it now. So my presumption is that these guys did exactly what should have been done up front and that they had no problem doing it, but it seems they did not do it, and they should have by what law states. And this is within their documents. Why didn't they follow procedure? Who was doing it? That's the question. Who was the arresting officer that didn't follow procedure? Investigators, this is not good. This is a strike against them because they were being accused of murder, which is an extreme felony, one of the worst felonies you can get. So being that was the case, DNA should have been pulled up front. Now, the fact DNA was not pulled up front, was there some inquisitive factors to make them not do it? Were they uncertain of themselves? See, now this creates a whole nother genre of running with information, because you guys not only didn't follow procedure, but we have evidence that speaks against there being any cause for there being any DNA or anything extracted. So literally this opens up the field wide for lawyers to say, no, you guys didn't follow procedure. So now they don't have to roll with the procedure. There's nothing they have to run with. There's a lot of gray area here. The fact that it is allowed to be accepted, but at a certain given time during the arrest, and felonies are doing arrests, so they can take DNA if needed for later. But what they're saying is they didn't follow the procedure correctly, which means that I don't know if it can actually even be collected now, because you guys didn't do that up front. Now, was this done on purpose to allow these four men to have a way out if the lawyer proceeds to go with the narrative that is introduced by prosecutors? This is very important because this is going to begin to tell us not only if procedure was followed, but who was not following it and whether or not they were able to obtain this type of information. From looking through the procedures, this was to be obtained during the arrest and up front. There is no literal opening that they can do it later, nor is there some type of statement that they can double back and do something like this because the case has produced evidence when it doesn't pertain to the rest of the individuals. Now, I've also read some other articles admitting to finding a caliber weapon at someone's house, but we don't even have a cause of death on a death certificate to show that this was applicable to the situation. Oh, it gets even deeper. It gets even deeper. There's still a lot of questions, and behind the scenes, I am doing investigations into the parties where the crime scene allegedly occurred. I got some valuable information, no matter how little, how least it is. And I'm going to deliver that from the next commenter's question. But very good question, Isness. It seems that you were spot on with the fact that this should have been incurred earlier on, and it should not have been a question later whether they'd need this or even if they asked for it. So what's going on? Why these investigators were so sloppy, I don't know. Was it because they were so hyped up over the manhunt? Was it because they were behind the scenes running rampant? Well, we know the running rampant part's questionable because they found evidence in the grandmother's car which did not allot them to do some certain things. So now we have some question into how they were able to get to certain conclusions without being able to do the investigation properly by searching places that they should have been searched. So why is everything being done so late? Who's not calling the shots? Who's the lead investigator? That would be a very good question, and only they can answer the whys and why nots. But at the end of the day, the DNA collection is questionable now because it is to be done up front during the arrest unless a misdemeanor conviction is being handed out. And now that they're collecting the DNA, and that's only for certain misdemeanors, but all felonies are allotted to have collected DNA. And that would be the level of case they're dealing with. Most felonies are going to deal with the harm of another individual, if not the harm of oneself. And that's why DNA is a very prevalent collection for it. So literally the probable cause is in another individual being involved. Not only that, but the evidence weighing to a certain level in which they cannot avoid collecting different factors to alleviate answers in certain situations. So Isness is absolutely right. Why didn't they collect this information? Something to think about. And I'm not going to say I have all the answers around why they didn't do it. Wow, he had a loud car. Sort of like mine, but his wasn't even a V6. But it does reach to certain understandings that of questions that we've been asking all along. How were these individuals even related to the case? And if you say you find evidence, does that mean I have to provide you with samples because you did the process wrong? Because now prosecution is asking in, let's say, an alternate fashion versus the arresting parties dictating that this is to be done to supply us with knowledge of who is linked to what evidence. Because that would clearly tell me you didn't have evidence up front. Very, very peculiar and very, very similar to California standards, almost verbatim. So if California does this up front, why haven't you guys done this up front? But remember, to collect it up front, probable cause is a factor. The validation of probable cause is also implicated. Now, also, you got to understand an individual was in a crash shortly after the incident, and he had to pay a ticket. What was up with that? How come that individual wasn't arrested, even though he didn't have the proper licensing, allegedly, to have been questioned and taken into custody for basically driving without his license? Now, I'm in a different state, but from my understanding, if you're driving without a license, this literally leads you to be researched for prior incidents that caused you to be without the license, and then you're taken into custody. Why wasn't he taken into custody but given a ticket, not only to get the car out, but to basically say, hey, you were without a license? That's very strange too. You would have at least went into custody into a booking of some sort for breaking the law, but he was let go so easily. Was this for a matter to protect his identity in some way, shape, or fashion? Or what did he say in the situation to get out of it? What was in that car he crashed with? So who stored all the evidence, and what did Michael Boatwright leave the scene in if you're saying you found it in his grandmother's car? Were there multiple vehicles on the scene linked to these individuals? Or was this a mistake, again, on authorities' part? It gets deep. That is a good question that leads us to further implications of who actually was involved in what. Even if they're trying to claim Diedrich had a weapon, and you're saying he had it, how did all the evidence end up in Michael Boatwright's car? And then later on, Diedrich asks for a private investigator, but they're saying, oh, now we found a gun in your possession at your place of stay. That's very peculiar. And there's many different factors that aren't adding up to a situation we know a normal murderer or a normal suspect is held in regard for. Now, I don't have all the answers around that case because my focus was not the suspects as much as the crime scene. But now we do have a lot of, let's say, missing factors that can lead to a deeper plot being in the folds. That's what cases should do. That is what evidence should do for people. But we see it doesn't, and we see it hasn't. But as we progress forward, we should get a clearer view of what actually is happening, being that this is the case now. So we don't have any open factors to lead us to ask for more information, but we also don't have a toxicology report, and we don't have the rights to get a final death certificate around the incident. This is something serious, and this is something that needs to be taken into consideration. So everybody give a hand clap for Isness bringing out a factor of where she lives versus Florida and what's the difference. From my alleged research, I don't see a difference, nor do I see reason for them to not ask for this. So the fact that process was not followed to the T according to Florida state law, do you think that now all men have the right to get off with their lawyers, and if they play it right, because the full process was not followed and prosecution is going back asking for something that they should have recorded, accepted, and basically took into hand at the very start of their investigation? Because we see they dropped the ball in a few instances. Does this lead to further constraints against them being prosecuted in the case? Do these suspects now gain an out because prosecution is subliminally admitting to a mistake? We'll see later. More comment or questions up. All rights reserved.